Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. I think its broadcast date is the 15th, yes, the 15th of September 2016. And thank you for coming back and welcome back to the show. I hope you're enjoying the programs that have been broadcast since I came back from the summer break. And I've been enjoying them very much. I've been loving your comments and your feedback on the comments of the video below. We seem to have gotten rid of most of the vermin that were plaguing and the fanatic cult lunatics who were plaguing the comments on my YouTube for months. And you know, thank you for being part of this developing conversation because I'm learning from you all the time. Often comments left on the shows and often on the Facebook pages that where they're broadcast or posted, you often leave very interesting comments that they cause me to go look further. Now, tonight I want to sort of expand outside the ghetto of European folklore. I want to talk about particularly Middle Eastern folklore. When I was in Malta last year, I picked up a book in a bookshop there down a side street in Valletta on Maltese folk tales. And I found it very interesting how the Maltese folk tales were a kind of a hybrid of European, African, and Middle Eastern. And it started to get me looking more into Middle Eastern folklore because I've been very close-minded about it in many ways, not because of any kind of like limitation I'm posing on myself for any kind of philosophical reason, but it's literally because the European folklore thing is so vast. I didn't want to spread it all over the place when I was researching for the Druid Code. I didn't want to be like, I didn't want a shotgun approach. I wanted to be comparative in terms of mythological study, but keep it within a workable envelope that wouldn't be too overwhelming. Well, now that the Druid Code is out there, I can sort of expand the horizon, so to speak. I've done a fair amount of work this has gone back years now, into Vedic and Hindu, Indian subcontinent archetypes, and that's always been very rewarding because it links up very well with my interest in both the tarot and European and heathen mythology. The universality of the motifs, of the stories, of the undercurrents always seems to come through. Now, we do have a situation in the Middle East that's quite unique compared to the rest of the world. Because the Middle East, and we're talking about the area from sort of Syria, Turkey, and down into Egypt, it really is the crossroads of the world prior to the discovery, or should we say the European trade routes into North America being opened up and developed. It really was until then the pivot on the center of the world, which had all rotated. I'm talking culturally now, not specifically, not literally, but culturally, because you had the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe all basically meeting at this point. And so this developed this became kind of a PowerPoint. Whoever controlled that basically controlled ideas in the other three huge continents. Hence why we'd have these Abrahamic religious wars there, which is why even today, in a psychological sense, in terms of consciousness and the psyche, the Middle East still rules our world. And this has to do with the Abrahamic religions. Now, I'm not putting them all down. I'm not putting them down because, I'm just telling you I don't particularly care for all three of them, mainly because they've been corrupted. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Islam, unfortunately, was taken over by a very sort of dogmatic Arabic agenda, and it has dominated the Islamic world ever since. When you saw what happened when the Moors were in charge of Islam and the Persians, it was a time of great growth and great, shall we say, advancement in terms of science, architecture, and so on. You heard me talk the other day there about the Islamic architecture and the Islamic calligraphy and so forth. In Judaism, well, there's even a debate in Israel itself surrounding the Torah and the Talmud. Now, the Talmud is this, I know Jews who call the Talmud that Babylonian waffle, and they specifically want to stick with the Torah. Now, for me, the Talmud is a fascinating book, mainly because it's a book of sorcery. It's a book of magic, where the Torah is more of a religious text. In Israel, you have one of the reasons. See, people constantly post these images of Orthodox Jews, like groups like the Lubavitch and these other Hasidic type sects who are anti Israel. Well, they're not anti-Israel because Israel is bad. They're anti-Israel because Israel is not fully devoting itself to the Talmud. That's the reason why. They want the Talmud, basically the default book of Judaism, and they want basically the Torah abolished. So there's lots of sort of philosophical and theological schisms within Judaism. And in Christianity, well, Christianity went completely wrong after the Council of Nicaea when it basically became the Roman Empire, and that's the problem there. So I'm not saying, when you hear me going on about Islam or Christianity or Judaism, I'm basically talking about the one thing that it is, and that's the Abrahamic Babylonian religion that may work for those people in that part of the world. I'd like to see proof of it, but it doesn't really work here. For very complex reasons. But having said that, that doesn't mean they're inferior or that we should hate them or oppress them. It's just that they're in early stages of development is the best way to actually think about it. Think of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, but to a lesser degree Judaism, in very early stages of their own development. Remember, the European sort of pagan or heathen religions go back 10,000 years. The Indian Vedic traditions go back the same. That makes them almost about three times longer in their existence than any of the Abrahamic religions. It's early days yet. Now, I've had this book for years in my collection, and it's called The Holy Land: Myths and Legends, and they're compiled by someone called J.E. Hanauer. I can't really pronounce his name. It's an ancient book from 1907, and it's a very interesting book from 1907. And basically, he went to the Middle East to discover the folklore in the same way that Wentz, who was the American who first translated the Tibetan Book of the Dead, he went to Ireland back in the turn of the century and collected all the Irish folk tales, the turn of the last century, and collected all the Irish folk tales simply by going into the villages and talking to the people. As you know from my book, The Druid Comb, and the story of Cormac O'Neill and his recounting of the legend of the sun playing a part in the solar aspects of the Newgrange Temple, to the shock and even disgust of the visiting British antiquarians, he was proven to be right because that was the real deal. He had preserved within his local folk culture a story that had lasted 5,000 years. Mythology works because as the survey that came out, the research program that was done at the University of New Lisbon in Portugal, the New University of Lisbon in Portugal, and Durham University a couple of years ago, validated that folk tales go back as far as the Bronze Age. So mythology is often very more real than history. Now, one of the recurring themes in my own lifelong interest in mythological comparative archetypes and constants, tropes, certain things always come up again and again. Bull symbolism or antler symbolism. You've heard me talk about that in the past. I did a whole show on Whole Velocity of Now show on bull symbolism and bovine symbolism, and then you've heard me also talk about the idea of antlers, head the hunt, Herne the hunter, and so on. All these kind of like these deities that are half human and they're horned beasts or antler beasts. That's a very common. The other one is that these interdimensionals, that these are like fairy type people who or demons who exist in a reality just outside our perception, and they have a problem with the human race. That's the other one. And there's a few more. And continuing on from that particular aspect, we have the idea of the little people, or the small people, or people who live under the ground. And we have this story stretching all over, even in the Native Americans have it, it even exists in Africa, the story of small humanoids, little people, generally with dark skin, who live on the ground. And this has been everywhere. This has never been not a part of our folklore and our mythological traditions. Now, before I get to that, I want to talk about this is the week of 9/11, or following the week of the 15th anniversary of 9/11, or whatever it is. A story appeared in the online in the vintage news, and you've heard me talk about in the past about war magic and so on. Now, the only aspect of 9/11 that interests me, the 9/11 attacks, is the occult nature of 9/11. And I'm not talking specifically about the occult or magical aspects of it leading up to the attack, although that's there too. But you're not going to have something that profounded so intensely and so uniquely upon human consciousness to the point where it's not going to produce or not going to result in either accidental or deliberate occult aspects. Now, you heard me talk, and I think I did a talk in New Horizons there a few years ago in England, and the video somewhere online where I showed the image of the Wellington Monument in the Phoenix Park in Dublin. It's the largest obelisk in Europe, and it was built to celebrate the Battle of Waterloo. And along the side, this thing used to terrify me as a kid, and along the sides are these gigantic friezes cast in bronze of battles that Wellington commanded over. And these images, are cast from the cannons that were the French cannons that were captured by the British at Waterloo. So these cannons would have killed people, and yet they're actually embedded into a monument celebrating the British Army, the British military history, cannons that probably killed these people. And the friezes have men lying down, dying with their arms in the air and all this stuff. Now, this kind of war talismanic, sympathetic magic has never really gone away. And the story in the vintage news this week really brings it home. USS New York, built with 24 tons of steel salvaged from the World Trade Center to commemorate the victims of 9/11. And there's a picture of the battleship and a picture of one of the towers being blown up when the plane hit it. The USS New York, the 5th San Antonio class amphibious transport dock, is the 5th ship of the United States Navy to be named after the state of New York. The New York has a crew of 360 and can carry 700 Marines. It is notable for using a symbolic amount of steel salvaged from the World Trade Center after it was destroyed in the September 11 attacks. The ship was forced to be designed fully using from the CAD screen up to support all of the Marines' primary mobility capabilities, landing craft, air cushion, and M52-22 Ospreys. Shortly after the 11th of September 2001, Governor of New York George A. Pataki wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy, Gordon R. England, requesting that the Navy bestow the name New York on a surface warship involved in the war of terrorism in honor of the victims of the September 11th attacks. According to Wiki, the contract to build the New York was awarded to Northrop Grumman Ship Systems of New Orleans, Louisiana in 2003. New York was under construction in New Orleans at the time of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. At 7.5 short tons, or 6.8 tons of steel used in the ship's construction came from the rubble of the World Trade Center. This represents less than 1,000th of the total weight of the ship. The steel was melted down at Ammonite Foundry and Machine in Amite, Louisiana, to cast the ship's bow section. It was poured into molds on 9th of September 2003, with 7 short tons cast from the ship's stem bar, part of the ship's bow. The shipyard workers reportedly treated it with reverence usually accorded to religious relics, gently touching it as they walked by. One worker delayed his retirement after 40 years of working to be part of the project. You see, the religiosity is very powerful in this stuff. On 9th of September 2004, Deputy Defense Secretary Gordon R. Ingman announced that two of the New York sister ships will be named Arlington and Somerset in commemoration of the place where the two other planes used in the attack came down, Arlington County, Virginia, and Somerset County in Pennsylvania. New York was christened on the 1st of March 2008 in a ceremony in Avondale Shipyard, New Orleans. Dottie England, the ship's sponsor, smashed the traditional champagne bottle on the ship's bow and christened the ship New York. Several dignitaries were in attendance, and then it goes on and just talks. On November 20, 2009, it passed by the World Trade Center for the first time and gave a 21-gun salute. So, you see, there's a symbolic. You see, when people say this, that there's no such thing as magic, well, the people who run this world use magic all the time. And that's an example of it. Now, back to tonight's topic at hand. The underground folk of the Middle East, particularly the Palestine region, known to both the Christians and the Muslims as the Jan, but the Jews do have a similar name, similar folk tradition and for little people, underground people, and they call them the Shadim, and they're almost identical to the Jan. So, reading from the book. The people of Palestine, Christian as well as Muslim, believe in the existence of a race of beings of a predominant origin, called by the general name of the Yan. Whilst the angels dwell in the heavens and in various offices and forms according to their respective abodes, those in the lowest form of heaven, for instance, being shaped like cows, those in the second like falcons, and in the third like eagles, excuse me, in the fourth like horses, and so on. The Yan are said by the learned to be created in the fire of Shurum, which is described as a fire lacking both heat and smoke. Very similar to that to the Jinn. The Jinn, they are, without smokeless fire. They are said to dwell chiefly. It's really an allegory for plasma. They are said to dwell chiefly in and amongst the Jabal Kaf, the range of mountains which surrounds the earth. Some of the Yan are good Muslims and do not injure their humans, co-religionists, but the greater number of them are unclean infidels who take up their abode in rivers, fountains, cisterns, ruined buildings, bath cellars, ovens, cave sewers, and latrines. This comes directly from the Babylonians. The Babylonians, their belief in where demons dwelled is in the exact same place. Some of them chose as dwellings cracks in the walls or under the doorsteps or thresholds of inhabited houses, so that it is very dangerous for people, especially females, to sit on a doorstep in the evening when these night-prowling evil spirits may do them grievous bodily harm. That means entering to them, getting them pregnant, and giving birth to a demon child. The Yan are believed to be able to assume any shape they please and to change it at pleasure. Among the peasantry, there is a current another story as to their origin. It is that our mother Eve, on whom be peace, used to bring forth 40 children at birth, but being unable to nurse more than half that number, she picked out the 20 best ones and threw the others away. She told Adam on each occasion that she had borne only 20, but he did not believe her. He therefore asked Allah to let any children she had thrown away live underground and go abroad at night when all men sleep. Thus the Yan came into being. The Yan are envious of us men and women. You see, this always comes around. In the Irish tradition, the Middle Eastern tradition, the Indian tradition, you name it. The fairy folk, the little people, whatever you call them, are envious of humans. Always on the watch for a chance to injure. And unless we say Bismillah whenever we begin any work or take anything out of our stores, they succeed in robbing us. There is, at the present day, a man living in, this is from 1907, so it's the present day of 1907, at An Karim, who has experienced this to his cost. He had a silly forward daughter who, in spite of her frequent warnings from her parents and neighbours, would not invoke the name. He was a man of substance and brought home provisions in plenty, yet the blessings of Allah did not rest upon his property. At length, perplexed and discouraged, he had recourse to the great Sheketh, who asked, Whom have you in the house, my wife and daughter? Does your wife invoke the name of Allah. I would have not married her if she had not done so. Does your daughter also name? I regret to say she does not. Den said Sheketh, don't let her touch anything about the house and get rid of her at once. The father acted on Sheketh's advice, and no sooner had he disposed of his daughter in marriage than the Yan ceased to trouble him. But the bridegroom, till then a thriving man, had not now enough money to buy oil to keep a lamp burning through the night. Not only are the Yan men and women like ourselves, but they can, and sometimes do, intermarry with other sons and daughters of Adam, often against the will of the latter, when these have neglected to ask the protection of Allah. In proof of this, I will relate an incident that occurred some years ago. There was a man of the village of El Isra'en in the North Valley of the Mount of Olives who, going to reap his harvest in the neighborhood of Usharan near Arfuth, was not heard of for 9 years. It was said that he had been devoured by a hyena, but in the end he reappeared and told his story. He was sleeping one night on the threshing floor to protect a store of Dura when he was awakened about midnight by the sound of voices drawing near. Supposing it to be a tax gatherer and his assistants, he lay quiet and still for fear of being beaten, but it was part of the Yan, and as at lying down he had neglected through his weariness to invoke the protection of Allah. So now sudden fear kept him from using that simple precaution, and left him to the mercy of the demons. He did not realize who they were until it was late and had become their victim. All he knew at first was that a woman came and smote his forehead, and then the blow bereft him of all his strength and will. She bade him follow her, and he obeyed blindly. When they had gone some distance from the threshing floor, she told him she had his wife, and that unless he submitted to her desires, her brothers, who had seen him follow her, would kill him horribly. Soon afterwards her brothers came up, and they saw that they were Yinnis. This is Jinn. They told him he had become one of themselves, and he would thenceforth be invisible to the eyes of men. So switching into another dimension, the story of the Irish Lianon Shee, the woman who basically seduces young men, and then they become famous artists or poets, and then they die soon afterwards. They waste away. There's also a theory that they actually are wasting into another dimension. It's almost like a courtship with the other side. 9 years he belonged to the Yan, and took part in all their depredations, until one day, when they were lying hid among the ruins, he noticed how his companions kept away from one of the walls on which was a luxuriant growth of fenyan, or rue, and himself out of curiosity went towards it. As the sheik from his yin and yang of don't go near those plants, he ran and plucked a whole handful from the wall. Then looking around, he saw that the Yan had vanished and was free to return to his human family. When the Fellahin, his neighbours, disbelieved his story, he asked after a woman named Ashera, and she told him that her husband had repudiated her because she robbed him and gave his goods to her brothers. There was no other supposition that could account for the way things vanished from his house. Thus one day he had filled a large mud-hut bin with barley, and when he opened it on the morrow it was empty, and in spite of his wife's protestations, he believed her to be the thief. The man who had been with the Yan explained that he had asked for the woman on purpose to prove her innocence and his own truthfulness. He had been present when the barley was carried off by the Yan, who knew that the divine name was not habitually called upon in that house. Other things that had been missed from the village while he was away had been carried off in like manner. Since that time, everyone has been careful to gather handfuls of a plant known as rue, and to keep it in the house, as no good man will begin a piece of work without invoking Allah the Merciful, the Compassionate, and no respectable woman will even take a handful of flour from its receptacle without likewise calling upon the Most High. This is, so many of our folk traditions all over the world are directly related to rituals protecting us from supernatural beings. A certain young married couple, though hardworking and economical, could not achieve prosperity because one thing after another kept disappearing from their house. Did the wife put a bag of wheat beside the handmill overnight? In the morning it had vanished, and if she put aside cooked meats or preserves, they were sure to be spirited off. Her husband had a mare which he greatly prized. Every night before going to bed he fed the mare himself, carefully locked up the stable door, and kept the key under his pillow till the morning. One morning when he had unlocked the door, the mare was gone, and believing her to have stolen by some human enemy, he trudged to the nearest town in which cattle markets were held, in the hope to recover her, but in vain. At last he concluded that the Bedou of the Belka had somehow gained possession of the false key and used it to rob the stable. So he set out for the country east of Jordan, hoping to find the missing thief in some Arab camp. At nightfall of the first day he found himself on a narrow gorge, in the side of which there were many caves. Seeing light in one of them, he supposed some shepherds or camel drivers were putting up there for the night, and hastened to join them. But on entering the cave he saw it was full of the Yan. Afraid to give offence by the retreat, he saluted them in as cheerful voice as he could command. They replied politely in the common formula, "Our house is thy house, our dwelling is for all who contains and belongs to thee." The demons, on the point of sitting down to supper, invited the guest to share the meal with them, and he had nervously accepted the invitation. Among other dishes there was one of rice and lentils mixed, of which, at the entreaty of the Yan, he partook, though sparingly. "We have already told you that everything here is yours." Then, looking around him, the man fancied a resemblance between the furniture of the cave and the things which had mysteriously disappeared from his own house. There followed a conversation, in the course of which he told his hosts about the loss of a mare, and whither he was going to hope to find it. They told him he need not go any further, for the mare was there with them, and he could have her for the asking. He managed to frame the demand, and the mare was brought to him at once. Dark as it was, he would have mounted there and then and started homewards, but his host invited him to stay the night, and, as he feared to offend them, he tied up the horse and remained. When he arose next morning he found the cave empty, but his mare still tethered into the same place where he had put her before lying down to sleep. Without mishap he rode back to his house, where his wife welcomed him with the news that all the things which had been missing had reappeared in the night as miraculous as they had vanished. Her joy was increased by the sight of the mare. Her husband, who had no breakfast, asked for food, when she at once produced a dish of lentils mixed with rice, explaining, as she did so, that she had cooked it on the day before, but not being hungry herself, had put it in for his return. Thereupon she recovered the dish to start back in surprise. "What is this?" she exclaimed. "When I put the dish away yesterday it was full and carefully covered, and yet, as you see, somebody has had a taste of it. It cannot have been the cat, for, though she might have moved the cover, she could have not possibly have replaced it." The young man was himself surprised when his wife said, till examining the dish, he knew it for the same from which he had eaten at the request of the Yan. The fact threw a new light on the strange experience. "My dear wife," he cried, "I know now the secret of our late misfortunes. It has been neglected a pious custom to our fathers to do the name of Allah at all seasons. Our things are stolen by the Yan through neglect. Let us amend our ways henceforth. Needless to say, that this day forward, the couple were very careful to ask for blessings on all they undertook, and thus to the end of their days enjoyed the protection of the Most High." Now, what's really interesting here is it suggests that this man didn't actually go away into the western deserts, into the eastern deserts. That in fact, he most likely went into a different dimension in his own home. Rather than traveling away in distance, he traveled away in a different reality. And yet, this This explains the lentils he had eaten from the pot in a different reality. The food is almost like cross-dimensional. The animals and the people are cross-dimensional, but the material objects are not. Not only is it held foolhardy to sit at the doorstep or threshold of a house, especially about sunset, but it's also dangerous to call any animal, even the smallest insect, without at the same time pointing at the object, because many of the Jan and other demons are named after animals and other things in nature, and should the name be used without a gesture, some Jinni will think that he is called and will take advantage of the mistake to harm the person calling him. A perfect multitude of the Yan may thus be summoned inadvertently, for amongst other things, as in other men's, some names are common. For instance, a certain woman who had no children, but who longed for an offspring, sat one evening on her doorstep, ignorant of the danger, when she noticed a black beetle crawling along the road. "I want a child," said the woman, even though she be only a girl and as black as a beetle. "Oh, kunhe shefhe, won't you come and be my daughter?" With that she arose and went into the house. Some time later, to her vast surprise, she actually gave birth to a whole swarm of black beetles. "Oh Lord," she said, "I only asked for one. Whatever shall I do with all these hundreds? I will sweep them up into a basket and put them in dry dung and carry them to the tabun and burn them all." So she did so, but on the point of return to the house, she noted that one of the creatures had escaped destruction by clinging with its feet to the wickerwork. "Well," she considered, "I did ask for one, and I will make a pet of this beetle, which, after all, is my child." So she took the insect home and made a pet of it. It grew bigger and bigger, and in time the mother's joy developed into a dark maiden whom she named Kunyafeshe. The creature, however, was a Ghilim, one of the most dreadful enemies of the human race, and she was rapidly growing big and strong. At length, upon a day, her mother bade her to take 4 loaves of bread and a plate of leaven to her supposed father, who was ploughing. The monster ate up the bread and the leaven on the way, and when she came up to the ploughman, she swallowed him and his yoke of oxen. This is very similar to the story of Fenrir, the adorable wolf puppy in the Nordic tradition, who grows up to be a giant. Then she returns and said to her mother, "I have devoured the 4 loaves and the leaven, as well as the ploughman and his oxen. Shall I also swallow you and the dough which you are kneading?" "Do so," she replied. Her mother, who thought of her precious child, was only jesting. The Gule at once gobbled up her mother, the dough, and the kneading trough. She went next to her grandmother, who was spinning, and said, "Grandmother, I have eaten 4 loaves and the leaven, the ploughman and his yoke, the trough full of dough, and the kneader. Shall I eat you?" "Do so, my child, if you like," said the old woman, and she was instantly devoured together with her spinning wheel. Then Kunhafashe went out of the village. Seated upon a dunghill, after the manner of the village elders, she found an old wise man, whom she knew it was not happened to be, though she knew it not happened to be armed with a 2-edged dagger. Accosting him, "O Sheke," she said, "I have devoured the 4 loaves, and the leaven, and the ploughman, and the yoke of oxen, the kneader, and the truffle of dough, and the old woman, and the spinning wheel. Shall I devour you?" Now the old man was wise and the owner of experience. From the manner of the dark girl's speech, he guessed that she had to deal him. So he answered, "Very well, my daughter, devour me if you please." But when she came near, he struck the dagger and killed her. Then he cut her open, and when lo, there came forth from her belly the whole unhurt 4 loaves, and the leaven, the ploughman, and the oxen, the kneader and truffle of dough, and the old woman and her spinning wheel. Since then, people have learnt not to doorstep in the evening, and not to speak to any living creature, except it be human, without pointing to it. And a note to this is that it's not uncommon for the natives of Palestine back 100 years ago, for a man or a woman to bury a charm under the threshold which some enemy is bound to pass. And this was also done with people from Palestine, when they moved to other countries, would still do this thing. They would bury a a charm on the threshold, like the prayer scrolls that the Jews put on their doorways. I forget what it's called, but the same idea. It's almost like it's a protective charm, because the threshold between the outside and the inside of your house is really sort of can be seen as a threshold between consciousness, because who you are behind closed doors is often not who you are out in public. And the idea of, you see, there's also a kind of a dark sorcery, is, this kind of idea of people opening their houses up and having no privacy, because they're almost losing a part of their soul. You look at all these celebrity magazines like Hello magazine, and they show all the celebrities showing the inside of their homes off, and you get those things in the past like MTV Cribs. Well, that's actually that would have been considered unheard of, or an abomination to people, and I still feel that way in the past. Your house and your home is a sanctuary, and you must protect it not only from the physical intruders, but also the non-material intruders. Another story, back to the book, illustrates the danger people run by calling animals by their names without at the same time pointing at them, is often heard. A young peasant woman had one day so much to do that it was not until evening that she found time to knead the bread. By the time it was ready, night had come, and it had grown so dark that she was afraid to go, unaccompanied, to the village oven. She begged her husband to escort her, but he ridiculed her fears, and just when she was setting out, called to a he-goat tethered in the yard. "Here, oh he-goat, take her, take her." He meant it as a joke, and he was surprised when she did not return. He went to the oven. She was not there. No one in the hamlet had seen her. He inquired at every house, searched the whole district, but in vain. Unable to believe that she'd gone off with another man, since he knew her heart was his, he could not account for her disappearance to himself or the neighbours, who began to suspect that he had killed her for infidelity. One day, when the bereaved husband was ploughing, an aged dervish came up and entered into the conversation with him. The peasant bemoaned the loss of his wife. "How much will you give me if I tell you how to recover her?" asked the dervish. "You should have the yoke of this oxen," replied the peasant eagerly. They would be useless to me," said the recluse, laughing, "but give me something to eat and I shall be satisfied. The peasant took the dervish to his house and set before him the best he had. When the guest had done eating, he said, "I am certain that your wife has been abducted by some Jinni, to whom your selfish jest gave power to harm her. I therefore advise you to go this evening to such and such a place, and such a cave, and such a wadi, the usual trysting place of the Jan in your district. As soon as you will see the cave lighted up after sunset, enter boldly and demand your wife from those within." The peasant did as he was told. The same evening he took up his station near the cave described to him, and as soon as he saw light streaming from it, he called for Allah to aid him and boldly entered. By the way, every in Palestine under the Muslims, every husband has the right, unless to kill his wife, or hand her over to her nearest brothers or male relations, that they can put her to death for her sins. So that's why there was no sort of legal ramifications that he had killed his wife. That was considered fine. It still is over there. Within the king of all the Jan was holding court, the peasant, undismayed, demanded his wife. The demon king seemed neither surprised nor offended by the tone of his authority, but quietly inquired of his subjects present whether anyone knew where this woman was. "I saw her in her own country, the Yabel Kaf, a short distance in such a place," said one. "How long will it take for you to fetch her, O camel?" asked the monarch. "Yabel Kaf is a long way off, and I should need 3 years to go and return," was the reply. Then the ruler of the Yan asked another demon named Horse how much time he would need to fetch the woman, and he said 3 months. A third Jinni named Wind, being asked the same question, replied 3 weeks. All the rest of the Yan answered in turn, each naming the time he required to do the errand. At last the king asked the man in detail the circumstances under which he had lost his wife, especially the words which he had used in parting with her. The peasant then confessed that he had thoughtlessly handed his wife over to a he-goat. On hearing this, the king ordered the genie thus named at once to restore the woman to her rightful husband, which she did. A shepherd once, after folding his flock for the night, went to sleep in a cave. He awoke about midnight to find himself in the presence of a large Yan. Afraid to give offence and being curious, he lay still with half-closed eyes, pretending to sleep. The leader of the party sent out some of his followers to forage for provisions. These soon returned with plenty of all kinds of food, and the Jan fell into a relish. Among the delicacies was a large tray of baklava, around which the whole party gathered. Just then a young female suggested that they should wake the sleeper and make him join them at the meal. The others, however, objected, and on the grounds that they might ask a blessing for the food, and thus compelled them to dispel and leave behind them all they had brought together out of the house of people who were not using the name, that's Allah. We will put a large portion of on a tray beside him for him to eat when he wakes. By the time we'll have gone, and in his blessing, if he ask one, will not hurt us. Hearing this, the shepherd sat up suddenly and exclaimed, Bismillah Rahman Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Merciful and the Compassionate. As one was awake and startled the strange company. At the name, the Yan all vanished screaming. The shepherd then slept undisturbed till morning, when he found the cavern stocked with provisions, sufficient to last his family for a whole year. He accepted them as gifts from Allah and had them conveyed to his own house. It is of utmost consequence to remember that the Yan should always be treated with respect. The same with the fairies in Ireland. You always treat them with respect. Because they're incredibly vindictive. Incredibly vindictive. So this is a common theme again all over the world, that you do not mock or you do not ridicule or, in any way offend them. On entering an empty room, a cellar, a cave, or even when sweeping a room which has for some time stood empty, we should never forget to say Dokasum Mabakin, by permission, blessed ones, and for short, Dustur, permission. The same formula should be used whenever one is carrying fire or water, so that the spirits may get out of the way and not run the risk of wetting or getting burnt by an accident. The safest way, however, is to habitually invoke the name and the protection of Allah. English people are often shocked at the frequency at which Easterns use the name of Allah, regarding it as a breach of the third commandment, but not realizing that they are merely following a practice which from them infancy has been accustomed to look upon, belonging to the very essentials of the religion, and the object of which protection of all evil. The importance attached to the practice has already been explained, but is further illustrated by the following tales. Now, before I get them, yes, they use the Muslims always use it, Allah this, Allah that, Allah this, Allah that. And if that seems to be a violation of the third commandment, do not take the Lord's name in vain, particularly for Protestants who went to the Middle East. I don't know. Is it in a form of OCD? Is it some kind of crutch? Is it some kind of necessity? But it's very strange how they use that name over and over, and that term over and over again. No other religion has anything close to it in terms of frequency of use. I'll just read one more Yan tale. There's just hundreds of them literally out there. A Falahan of El Valeke lost an eye, and a few years ago, under the following circumstances related by another Falahan, she was journeying from Jerusalem, and she was passing a fountain named Anhim Haniye. She heard a frog croak. Looking around, she noticed close to the stream a female frog, much advanced in pregnancy, and she thought about it, but ill-natured said to the creature, Allah grant that you may not be delivered of your child till I be called to act as your midwife. Having uttered this unkind speech, the woman went away. In the evening she retired to rest with her children, whose father had died in the war. Around her, but what was her terror when, awaking during the night, she found herself in a cave surrounded by strange and angry-looking people. It's always a cave. Remember, it's always a cave with the jinns or the jans. Or on the ground with the little people, on the she. One of these angry-looking people sternly told her that if she ventured to name, she was a dead woman, means calling the name of Allah. If we who live below, said he, come to you who live above ground, then it is a protection for you to name. But if in your case one of you intrudes needlessly and officiously upon us, naming will not help you. What harm had my wife done you that you should curse her as you did with this afternoon? So she was a Janny who had shapeshifted into a pregnant female frog. I do not know, nor I have seen your wife, replied the woman in terror. She was the pregnant frog you spoke to at Ain Hayanhi, was the answer. When we live on the ground, want to go abroad by daytime, we generally assume the form of some animal. My wife took the name of the frog you saw. You cursed her and mentioned the name. She was in the pangs of labour, but in consequence of your cruel malediction, cannot relieve till you assist her. I warn you, therefore, that unless she give birth to a boy, it will go hard with you. He then led her to where the wife lay with females around her. The woman from El Wajeh, though almost frightened out of her wits, did her best for the uncanny patient, who soon gave birth to a fine boy. When the father was informed of the happy event, he handed the human midwife a mukhele, or comb vessel, and told her to apply some of its contents to the infant's eyes, in order that they might become dark and bright. When doing so, she noticed that the baby's eyes, like those of the other Yan around her, differed from those of ordinary men and women, in that the pupil was longitudinal and vertical, like a reptilian. So, like the David Icke folks would love this story, that the otherworld beings have eyes like reptilians. In the Palestinian Islamic tradition, although the Christians also do this as well. When she applied the coal to the little boy's eyes, he took the bodkin which had been used and put some coal to one of her own eyes, but before she had time to put coal on the other female Yan, who noticed that this is coal with a Kohl, not Coal, angrily scratched the mukhale from her. Then she bade her loosen one of her flowing sleeves, in which, like other Syrian peasant women, she was wont to carry things, and filled it with something, though she did not know what. They next blindfolded her and led her out of the cave. When they told her she might uncover her eyes, she, on looking around her, found herself standing alone at Ain El Haniye. Being curious to know what was in her sleeve, she opened it and found a quantity of onion peels, which she promptly threw away. A few minutes later she reached her home, where she found her children asleep. As she was preparing to lie down, something fell out of her sleeve. She picked it up and found it was a piece of gold. Realizing the true nature of the supposed onion peels she had thrown away, she at once hurried back to the fountain, and sure enough found the onion peels lying untouched, but all of them turned into gold pieces. Gathering them up, she eagerly returned home, and there were still some hours till daylight, lay down and went to sleep. On waking the next morning, she thought she must have dreamt it all, and and all that had been narrated. However, when one of her children told her that one of her eyes had coal in it, Kohl, and the other did not, and above all, when they saw the store of gold coins, she was convinced that she had not been dreaming, and was now a wealthy woman. Sometimes afterwards, she went to the El Quds in Hawiye to do some shopping, and while she was standing close to the draper's shop, the Jewish draper's shop is just in front of the wheat bazaars, she saw the being whom she had assisted in her confinement mingling with the crowd and pilfering as she went from shop to shop. The woman from El Wahajeh went up to her and touched her shoulders, asked her why she did so. Being frightened by the Jinniye's angry look, she stooped and kissed the baby. The people who stood by thought her mad when they supposed they saw her kissing the air. Say another dimension. She's between dimensions. For as they had not seen the Yan cold applied to her eyes, they were unable to see what was going on. So the cold KOHL was almost like an ointment that allowed her to see between different dimensions. The Jinnee, however, said angrily, "What, are you going to disgrace us?" And straightway poking a finger into the poor woman's eye, the eye which had the cold in it, she blinded it on the spot. What misfortune might have happened had she applied the Jan's coal to both eyes, Allah only knows. But this seems certain, namely, that by reason of having such curiously formed eyes, the Yan can see and know many things which ordinary mortals cannot, and their coal helps them to a sort of second sight which we did not possess. That's like being able to see across different space-times. You very rarely meet people with such eyes. There is perhaps scarcely one in 10,000, but that one sees and can do things which other people cannot, and therefore the Muhajiria, Arabs of North Africa, who have the powers of magic, know where hidden treasure may be found, and are always on the lookout for such persons in hope of obtaining their assistance. A mason nearly related to one of my neighbours rose very early one morning to go to work. As the full moon was shining, he did not realize how early it was. Going along, he was overtaken by a wedding procession, all bearing torches. The women uttered their Zumgaret, Sagharit, as they were going to the same way, but he kept up with them out of curiosity, noting that the men looking grim and fierce. One of the women gave him a lighted taper, which he accepted. He now realized the true character of these people who had taken for Cicerarians, but having the presence of mind instantly to evoke the aid of Allah and all the saints, he was a member of the Orthodox Greek Church. His dreaded companions vanished, and he found himself alone in the street with a donkey's leg bone in his hand. Terribly frightened, he went straight home, was very ill for a long time afterwards. So there you go, stories from the Islamic world of basically the same things we have in Europe and everywhere else. This common thing that appears over and over again of little people don't like humans, play tricks on us, steal from us, and have the ability to move between dimensions, or they exist in a different other space-time. And humans who enter into their space-time or enter out of it are profoundly changed by it. Especially that last story about the reptilian eyes. I find that very, very interesting. The whole idea of snake eyes, the whole idea of someone having snake eyes. We know that snakes see in very differently than humans do. They see in almost like a kind of an infrared vision. They don't see like we see. They see in a very different form. This is probably why people in, say, India have no problem. The snake's eye vision allows them to almost sense behavior. So if a king cobra sees a human who's afraid of them, it will strike because it probably senses or sees through these snake eyes the rush of adrenaline or something. It's very common stories in India of babies playing with king cobras who are flared up in front of them, and the king cobra doesn't strike because it doesn't sense the fear or the rush of adrenaline from the baby, who thinks it's just like it sees the king cobra snake as no different than a puppy or a kitten or something. So that's the first there on the Islamic other little people, the underground folk, the Yan, and I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the second hour on the other side of this. And yes, I will play the full theme music of the show on the other side. I know some of you kept asking for that. I'm glad that you really like that piece of music. It's amazing how something I wrote on my synthesizer in 20 minutes and recorded in like a half an hour has become so iconic. But I'm glad because it actually achieved what I wanted, some dramatic, tension-building, exciting music and the Velocity of Now theme. And my website is www.thomassheridanarts.com and www.streetdruid.net, and there you can get links to all my other articles and everything. And if you want to help me out, you can buy a book there. And I'll see you in hour 2 of the Velocity of Now here on Thomas Sheridan Arts on my YouTube channel, Thomas Sheridan Arts, on the 15th of September 2016. I'll see you then in a little bit. Go make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea.